We spend money all the time, every day, multiple times, for multiple reasons. We're used to the idea of spending money, we're used to the idea of trade, buying things and selling things. The question to consider in this video is some trade good and some trade bad? Can you have trade even though if you're making money, it's bad money to make? Is there a way to get better with doing trading, buying and selling? And that's the question to consider.
In economics, it's helpful to reduce large organizations to a more human scale, because the things we see happening on a global scale are really the same thing we see around us every day. Like here in this picture at the Muskegon Farmers Market, as we look around, we see buyers and sellers. The customer wants fresh vegetables, the farmer wants money for his hard work. So both parties agree to trade their goods, and both parties are happy. This is how trade is supposed to work, and we assume it's how trade works all the time. But does it? Is some trade good and some trade bad? Years ago, I took my car into the shop to get the electronics looked at. I hoped it was just a bad battery. It wasn't. The mechanics told me a bad alternator had fried my battery, so I got them both fixed. Less than a month later, they were both bad again. Turns out some kind of electrical short somewhere was causing havoc with the car and all the problems to begin with. I never figured it out. I wound up selling my car for like $200 to someone who thought he might be able to fix it. Was this an example of bad trade? Was it a bad trade with the shop that the shop misdiagnosed my car, forcing me to spend hundreds of dollars for no reason? Would it have been a bad trade if I sold my car for $2,000 and never told the new buyer that there was a serious problem with the car? Economics forces us to consider, is trade good for its own sake, or is there some other sort of criteria or reason that we use to decide whether trade is good or bad? This video will look at some of the main organizations in the world that determine the effect of trade.
The foundations of the international system are really based on three core organizations: the World Trade Organization, the WTO, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF. We're going to take a look at each of these three organizations. Let's start with the IMF. The IMF really provides short-term loans to countries in order to help stabilize the economy. But they don't just try to stabilize the economy through loans, they also provide short-term loans specifically to make sure that the currency trade between different countries has been stabilized, and that we have a stable international currency trade between different countries. The World Bank also plays a part in helping to stabilize countries, and they also provide loans to countries, but their loans are intended really to help those countries who are not making a lot of money. Their main goal is the reduction of poverty, hoping to provide those long-term loans to countries so that they can increase the gross domestic product of that particular country. The third organization is the World Trade Organization, the WTO. That really takes an active role in encouraging trade between two different countries. So to increase trade between those two different countries and to encourage all countries really within the world global economy to trade as much as possible. So once again, we're really looking at three organizations in the economic system, the global economic system, the WTO, the IMF, and the World Bank. Each of these three plays their own different part in helping to maintain the stability and the growth of the global economy.
We've seen so far that each of these organizations tries to grow the international economy by helping developing economies improve by encouraging better trading practices and economic projects and policies. So why are these organizations sometimes controversial? The controversy really stems from two factors. First, the WTO, IMF, and World Bank aren't just giving money to other countries to do as they see best. there are strings attached. And if the countries don't use the money in the way the WTO, IMF, and World Bank want, then the money will go away. This had led some people to conclude that the WTO, IMF, and World Bank aren't really trying to develop the economies of other countries for the benefit of those countries. Some have argued that the WTO, IMF, and World Bank are really pushing policies that help the economies of the developed countries who fund these organizations. Of course, it's easy for critics to make those claims. Most of the critics of the WTO, IMF, and World Bank aren't wondering where their next meal is coming from. And supporters of the international organizations will point out that the programs make a real difference in the lives of real people. I'll leave it up to you to decide whether the IMF, World Bank, and WTO are doing more harm than good when it comes to world trade. That's really a debatable controversy. But what's not debatable is the role that those organizations play in world trade. They're absolutely central to everything that happens in world trade, and they're the foundation of the trade that takes place between countries, between organizations, and even between individuals. Their role is absolutely essential.